We have an opportunity here in the Mission Control Center to be joined by the Commercial Crew Program Manager, Ed Mango. Ed, we really appreciate you stopping by. I know you flew into Houston, I guess, yesterday, and so we grabbed you for a few minutes to come by. And I know Mission Control's not unfamiliar to you in your past life supporting space shuttle program here. So welcome. Thanks for stopping by for a few minutes.
It's very good to be here.
Well, I usually, when I talk to folks, I usually start out to let the audience know a little bit about them, your whole history about getting to NASA. Give us a little bit of biographical info on how you ended up in the space business, where you went to school, those types of things.
Let's see, I grew up in South Florida, and I got to see Apollo 17 launch from my backyard down in South Florida because it was a night launch, and that turned me on to this space stuff is pretty cool. I ended up going to school up in St. Louis University, Parks College, and then I spent a couple years in the Air Force. About 5 years in the Air Force working the shuttle at Vandenberg when we were going to do a Vandenberg program. Once that was decided not to go there, some NASA folks at Kennedy asked me to come work at Kennedy, so I jumped on that in a heartbeat. And I've been at Kennedy for most of my career since then, except during return to flight for post-Columbia. I came over here to JSC, great place to work, and was deputy of the orbiter project office during return to flight phase. I've since been back at Kennedy, and about a couple years ago, I was asked to lead the commercial crew program. And at that point, it was a planning office trying to figure out if we can go do a commercial crew endeavor. And now it's a full-up program, and we're trying to execute.
Well, here we go. Um, you kind of talked about how you segued into that role, but the government, the way we've done business in the past, it's a little bit different with your program moving into a commercial crew endeavor. But give us kind of a flavor for how your organization is set up, and because you've got folks working with the program office in Florida, the deputy program obviously based here, so there's a lot of interaction between your team, but how did you organize all that?
And see, when we started the program, or the planning office for the program, Brent Jett, who's my deputy here in Houston, him and I got together and said, how do we want to organize? And unlike the shuttle program that had different projects at different centers, we wanted to be as center-less as possible and get the right talent in the program. So we created organizations within the program that have people here in Johnson, as well as people at Kennedy, as well as people at Marshall, and they all work in the same specific areas, like launch vehicle, like in our partner integration teams, and that kind of thing. And we looked for the best people to go do those. It didn't matter what zip code they lived in, to create the program office. So it's a little different than what the shuttle program did. At the same point, in 2012, I think the borders of zip codes and things are much easier to get around because of all the media ability to communicate back and forth.
Right, right. The other aspect of commercial crew is you're operating under Space Act agreements, which we're all familiar with that, obviously, in business, but it's not a true contract type scenario. And try and lay out for us the Space Act agreement part of the program, how that works, and what some of your milestones have been and are coming up.
Yeah, Space Act agreements was a different set of words when I first started. Again, I was used to contract mechanisms, and in general terms, a contract is there's a customer and a client, and then there's someone who's producing the activity, and that's a standard contract approach. And in SAA, the biggest difference is it's a partnership, and we both are bringing capability to the partnership. In this case, for commercial crew, we are bringing funding, a pretty big part of funding, but we're also bringing our 50 years of experience, our engineers, our safety professionals, our program management folks, to go help the individual partners move forward. And our partners are our companies, so we don't call them contractors, we call them partners. The big difference is in a contract you can direct the contractor to do work. Sometimes it comes at a cost. In a partnership, it's really it's a discussion between the two partners of what is the right thing to go do, and so the government can't force a partner to go do A, B, or C, but it's through our influence and through our experience that we can help the partners move forward with their designs.
All right, that's really it's an interesting approach, and I think I don't know if this is the right time for you, but you had a short video that you asked us to prepare for you. Is this a good time for that?
Yeah, I think it's a real good time because it's going to explain briefly how what we're trying to get done in a very positive sense.
Okay, let's run that. Oh, that's pretty fast-paced and probably representative of the commercial crew program right now as being pretty fast-paced. You've obviously, we just got well, we're operating under the fiscal 12 budget right now, and you got probably about half of what the original request was, and that you had to do a little bit of restructuring and how your philosophy on going forward. And can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe about your 13 request that obviously is just getting started for the program?
Sure. We the president asked for 850 last year, and in the end, through all the negotiating, we end up getting 406. So it's a lot less than we had anticipated. And so one of the first things we did is we saw that there's some uncertainty in the budget numbers we're going to have not only for this year at 406, but also for the next couple of years. So we decided to back off from a fixed price contract and move into back into an SAA. And I talked earlier about what SAAs
Right.
were with partners, and on our contract we can drive them. The issue was on a fixed price, the government now is on that fixed price is guaranteed to have to pay so much for so much effort. And if we didn't have that kind of money, then the government side of that contract would be in trouble. So that for flexibility, went back to an SAA. This year, the president's budget asked for 830, and the reason for that is we need enough money to get into serious design work, serious development work, and then into certification. So for 830 per year for the next 4 or 5 years, that's how much money we think we need in order to get at least 2 multiple systems through certification, basically. The reason, a lot of talk about competition, and that is, I would say that, for all of us, the competition is key to how we do our whole acquisition approach, because as you have competition, then individual companies are going to see that they have a competitor on their side, and therefore they have to do things in order to make their system better, in order to make their system either more cost effective or have more performance.
Right, right. Well, part of that is, what you're talking about, narrowing it down to a couple of companies. Obviously, I believe you got 7 now that are operating under funded and unfunded Space Act agreements, and lay out how that is all structured right now, and what some milestones are leading up to selecting the finalist, if you will.
Okay, I think we even have a chart that kind of highlights all 7 uh, of our current partners, of which, if we can show that, that'd be good. Let's see, we have 4 partners that are funded and 3 that are unfunded, and we did that as we entered into CCDEV2. The agency and the organization, the program looked at the entrance of CCDEV2 and said, our biggest technology risks or our biggest risk towards development are really in spacecraft at this particular point. And so we really wanted to fund those spacecraft entities, and that's what we did for CCDF2, and that's why those are funded ones. Alongside of that, there are some unfunded ones that wanted to have us continue to work with them on their launch vehicles and how they might design their launch vehicles and or certify the launch vehicles. And so we entered into a couple more unfunded with some launch vehicle folks. And there was another spacecraft that wanted also to have it unfunded. So we worked with all 7 of those. The unfunded ones don't cost the taxpayer any dollars except in really in NASA support to go support those particular entities, but there's no funding exchange going on between us and the partner. The funded ones are really the ones that are trying to move us forward on overall development. And there are 4 of those. The first is really Blue Origin. Blue Origin is out of Seattle, and they are working towards some very good efforts on their abort system as well as a potential launch system for their design. Boeing is the next one, and Boeing is really working hard, a little more traditional in how they do business, and they are working towards a preliminary design review, of which we just finished their hardware one a couple weeks ago, and in fact that's why I'm in Houston, is to close out their PDR. We call preliminary design review, and that was really a joint partnership between us and Boeing, to where a lot of the findings and a lot of the issues that came out of that PDR were found through a joint team between us and Boeing. Very very good effort. Let's see, Sierra Nevada is another company. They're out of Colorado. They have a winged vehicle that they are developing, and the biggest part about a winged vehicle is how are you going to integrate the GNC or the guidance and control systems of a winged vehicle? So they're really focused on that, and plus also working towards a PDR kind of effort that they'll do later here this spring. And the last is SpaceX, and SpaceX is really taking their cargo system and trying to convert it to a human-capable system to carry crew, and their biggest effort during CCDF2 is really about aborts and their abort motors and abort system.
Right. Well, it's a great opportunity, obviously, for all of these companies to get involved. A perfect opportunity for you to be here because obviously the one of the goals is to transport crew back and forth to the space station, and of course this is the station flight control room. In fact, just a little while ago, Dan Burbank had an opportunity to do an interview, and he was asked about that, and he mentioned that the time is right, and you know that some of the systems are well enough understood to get to that point where we can actually have a U.S. Spacecraft. One of the last questions I wanted to ask you while you had time was, I kind of sense it working supporting the commercial crew a little bit, but it seems to me there's a lot of excitement, not only on the NASA side, but on with all of these companies as they, as kind of an integrated approach, and you've got folks that are supporting each one of those. But I mean, do you sense that when you travel a lot and talk to these people?
Let's see, our what we call them PIT teams, our partner integration teams, and I call them PIT crews for short. And I think you'll be talking to some of them over the next week or so. Our PIT crews are extremely excited about what's going on with each of their partners, and in the program, we're really excited about how we are developing this system. Very non-traditional. Overall, it's a non-traditional approach, but we have the confidence that says that we are going to get there, and given enough funding, we can get there by the middle of the decade. And I think Dan and the crew on station would like us very much to have a capability that has a U.S. flag flying on it in order to get not just our crew, but a crew from across the planet to the ISS and to that great laboratory that we have in space. And so the timing is right. Shuttle was a fantastic capability. It ended last year, and now it's time to move forward with the next capability to get to low Earth orbit. And that's what we're all doing. The companies are really over the top on excited. And because of the competition, you can see it's like different teams trying to compete against each other and really against themselves to perform so well and get designs that can work.
Yeah. Well, look, we really appreciate you taking time out. I know you're busy and with all the work that you came to Houston for, but it's really great for you to come by here and visit Mission Control and kind of update us on everything that's going on with Commercial Crew. So we appreciate it. Ed Mango, the manager of the Commercial Crew program, stopping by here in Mission Control for a talk about his program and what's been going on there. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.